Many people wondering, is Will Smith going to speak out, give another statement? Is Chris Rock going to say more at his show tonight? I'm standing right here in Boston in front of the Wilbur Theater, where Chris Rock is going to take the stage once again. I went to both of his shows last night, Aaron, and in the second show, he said that he and Will Smith have not spoken, which is shocking to think that Will Smith has not actually apologized directly to Chris Rock. Aaron?
That's incredible. All right, Chloe, thank you so much for your reporting. And thanks to all of you. AC 360 starts now.
Good evening from Ukraine. John Berman here in for Anderson. It has been a significant day at the start of what could become a critical point in the war. We will certainly ask our military analysts about it tonight, but some of the signs are plain to even civilian eyes. Ukrainian troops defending Kyiv continue pushing Russian forces away from the capital, even as a portion, the Pentagon says, about 20%, are leaving on their own. Some have withdrawn from the Chernobyl nuclear power station and disaster site north of the city. The company running it says that Russian troops dug trenches in the highly contaminated isolation zone, received what it says were significant doses of radiation, and, quoting now, panicked at the first sign of illness. CNN cannot independently confirm that, but just imagine the effect on morale, which apparently is poor across the board. Speaking today, the head of Britain's intelligence agency, GCHQ, said, and I'm quoting here, "We've seen Russian soldiers short of weapons and morale, refusing to carry out orders, sabotaging their own equipment, and even accidentally shooting down their own aircraft." Meantime, Vladimir Putin signed the order today calling up 134,000 draftees for its spring military conscription effort. Many of the enlisted Russian personnel in Ukraine, as you know, are conscripts. That said, for all the Russian losses, especially in and around Kyiv, and signs of Russian redeployment away from the area, they remain an existential threat elsewhere.
Огонь! Выстрел! Заряжай! Огонь!
New video from Reuters of Russian-backed troops firing rocket-propelled grenades in a Mariupol neighborhood. And this is what weeks of bombardment have done to the strategically important city. It is, by some accounts, hanging on by just a thread, with Ukraine's president saying the situation in the south and east of the country is, in his words, extremely difficult. Today, Russian military officials promised to reopen a humanitarian corridor from Mariupol to Zaporizhzhia starting tomorrow. And if that hellscape video were not enough to show what this war is doing to this city and its most vulnerable residents, there is this. And we should warn you, this is not easy to watch. A little boy named Dima, wounded in Mariupol in a Zaporizhzhia hospital, separated from his father, who was being treated for his own wounds elsewhere in the building. Dima is just 3 years old. According to Ukraine's defense ministry, at least 148 children have been killed since the invasion began. CNN's Ivan Watson is in Zaporizhzhia for us tonight, reporting on the fight for Mariupol. CNN chief international anchor Christiane Amanpour is in Kyiv. CNN's Nick Robertson is in Brussels for us tonight. And at the White House, CNN's Caitlin Collins. We begin with Christiane Amanpour.
The first thing you notice approaching the front northeast of Kyiv are the lines of villagers waiting for humanitarian handouts. They receive a bag of bread and basics to get them through these difficult days. The first week of the war, a shell hit us near the greenhouse. We barely survived, says this woman. We had help from strangers around us. They gave us bread and canned food. We wouldn't have managed otherwise. No one here knows when this war will end or whether Russia still has designs on Kyiv. The front line is about a mile away. For now, an uneasy calm prevails ever since the Ukrainian defenders stopped the Russian advance here. It was February 28th, they say, day 4 of the war. They want to show us how they did it, but first we have to clamber over the bridge they downed to see the armored column they managed to take out. The riverbank is littered with their skeletons, and this was a turkey shoot. Russian armored vehicles and tanks had come off the road to avoid the anti-tank mines, only to find themselves unable to cross the bridge and unable to reverse in time. Ukrainian forces tell us none of the soldiers inside survived. A little further up the road, 2 tanks have been virtually smelted, blasted almost to smithereens. 40-year-old Yevgeny, a veteran fighter, proudly tells us this was his handiwork. We all here have one role: to keep the enemy off our land, he says. First thing they did after seeing the village, they started to shell houses, just like that. They didn't see us. They didn't know we were here, so they just started to work on houses. And so I took the tank in my sights and I fired a rocket, and goodbye to him. The destroyed vehicles are stamped with an O. The Ukrainian officers here tell us this identifies them as Russian units that entered from Belarus to the north. Oleg is the officer who commanded this operation. As for now, looking at previous fighting we've had, I can tell you that we are trained better, he tells me. We have stronger morale and spirit because we're at home. They are afraid, but they go because they're made to. He's been battle-hardened ever since the first Russian invasion in 2014. He says his side has enough weapons, ammunition, and determination to win. I can tell you I'm almost sure the Russians are regrouping and not retreating, he says. Besides, we are preparing ourselves to go forward. We're not preparing just to defend here. US and British intelligence say Putin seems to have, quote, massively misjudged this situation and clearly overestimated the abilities of his military to secure a rapid victory. And this old lady tells us, I have seen one war and here we go again. I wish Putin would go away. The people of this land remain stalwart and the soldiers remain dug in, hoping they can continue to withstand whatever Putin has in store for them next.
What a perspective. Christian, what are you told about what is happening in the fight for Kyiv tonight?
Well, it's really rare to get to see these destroyed Russian tanks, and we've been told that, yes, some Russian forces are regrouping and potentially going to Belarus to refit, resupply, and then maybe be deployed elsewhere. But we were also told to watch out because the Russians could continue to use air and missiles, and sure enough, they have been. So they have 2 missile strikes in downtown Kyiv today, very close to where we are, but just downtown. I mean, it's really quite rare to see that. So we're not sure exactly why. There was clearly some kind of target, but that may be just to harass the Ukrainians while they try to move around and redeploy elsewhere. We're just not sure. John.
And no question, I haven't seen images like the ones you just showed us, Christian. Ivan, to you, what more are we learning about these buses trying to get to and from Mariupol?
Well, the big question is how to evacuate the estimated more than 100,000 civilians that are believed to still be trapped in the Russian siege lines under the bombardment of Mariupol. This morning, the Ukrainian government announced that they had gotten a message from the International Committee of the Red Cross from Russia, from the Russian military, saying that there would be an evacuation allowed. So the Ukrainians said, we're going to have a ceasefire, and they announced that they were sending 45 buses in the direction of Mariupol. By the end of the day, the Ukrainian government says the buses didn't reach there, that around 30 of them were held outside of a nearby city that's been kind of a stop along the way out of Mariupol called Berdyansk, and that they weren't allowed to pick anybody up, and that another 12 buses were stopped in another Russian-occupied city called Melitopol, and that some 14 tons of food and medicine were confiscated, the Ukrainian government claims, by the Russian military. That said, about 1,500 civilians were able to make it out all the way here to Zaporizhia, where I am, in their own vehicles. And we've seen those kind of trickles of vehicles coming out day after day while we've been here. Cars that are bashed up by the Russian shelling of Mariupol, but are being used to ferry people out. The Russian Defense Ministry has announced that it is going to try to open up a route for civilians to escape tomorrow, April 1st, Friday, and that this decision is being made at the request of the leaders of France and of Germany, and the Russian Defense Ministry is asking the Red Cross and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to help facilitate that process. So we're going to be looking to see if more civilians are helped to get out. It's one thing to come out in your private car. What about the elderly who maybe don't have vehicles, who don't have younger people to take them out? That's why the buses are so important right now, to try to help people out of that stricken city. John.
Yeah, the civilians need those buses to get through. Caitlin, what has President Biden been saying about what's going on here?
Well, he's echoing these intelligence assessments that President Putin is very isolated and looking inside the tense situation happening inside Russia, because clearly they believe here at the White House that the Russian leader is not appropriately informed, completely informed about what's happening on the ground. These reports that you're seeing about the frustrations that the Russians are facing when it comes to strategy and what they've actually been seeing on the ground. And he said today he believes that Putin has been isolated by this, that he is either firing or putting on house arrest his top advisors because of the frustration with how poorly this invasion is going for Russia and how much it is going against what he believed they were going to be able to do, which is overthrow the government there, take Kyiv in a few days, and have this warm reception from Ukrainians, which, of course, as Christian's report showed, that's not happening. And so this does confirm what U.S. intelligence had been saying. The president did offer a caveat, John, saying, this isn't based on hard evidence. This is based on intelligence. It's not always a complete picture, but it's often a good insight. And so far, the American intelligence on what Putin was going to do has been pretty solid, of course, as we saw when it came to this invasion. And it also mirrors what our allies are hearing, because you saw the British Foreign Secretary saying today that Russia is struggling, that Putin didn't know that there were conscripts being used in Ukraine. They accidentally shot down their own aircraft. Reports like that is raising concerns even inside the White House tonight about what's actually happening inside Russia.
Christiana, I should say, do the Ukrainians you've been speaking with believe what the Russians are saying in terms of pulling back from Kyiv?
No, they don't. In fact, the commander in charge of the operation that we saw today, that blew up the column that came into Kyiv, he said, look, they can say all they want. We don't believe they're retreating. They are regrouping, and we will be ready. But I think it's really interesting to get a look at what we saw, because the guy who took the tank out with his javelin told us that what he did was motivated by the fact that these Russian columns were absolutely just firing at civilian houses and structures for no reason, as they were just motoring down the road. There was no resistance, there was no attack on them until that happened, and then they popped out from where they were hiding and took out the tanks. But I think it's really important to realize that that is their tactic, and you can see it happening in Mariupol. And I've been told that anybody, or the latest leaders who've been talking to Putin, do find him still very entrenched in his belief that he is facing down terrorists and militants in Mariupol and elsewhere, and they don't see any sign of give in that, and that's very worrying.
Yeah, these are civilian targets. Caitlin, what does the White House hope will be the impact of the president's decision to tap into the U.S. strategic oil reserve, domestically and internationally? And are there any more Russian sanctions in the works?
Well, they say that there's always other sanctions that they could put in place. They could tighten the screws on the Russians even further than they have already. It really remains to be seen, the trajectory of this invasion. One thing I will note is the White House said today that they don't think a call between Putin and Biden will happen unless there is significant de-escalation. That's a pretty high bar for even a conversation to happen between the two of them. But when it comes to these oil prices, of course, that is a big problem for President Biden here at home. And there's only so much that the president can do when it comes to gas prices. And so he is tapping into the emergency reserves here in the United States. He's going to do so for the next 6 months straight, 1 million barrels per day. And so that'll be ultimately 180 million barrels of oil that they're going to release. But of course, course, that only accounts for about 5% of American consumption. And so when you talk to experts in the industry, they only think it's going to have maybe a modest impact on gas prices. And today, officials here were repeatedly asked when consumers could expect prices to go down as a result of this action. They could not predict anything specific, but it is Biden showing that he's doing what he believes he can to try to lower these prices, but also acknowledging the fact that this isn't likely to change anytime soon, John.
All right, Caitlin Collins, Christiane Amanpour, Ivan Watson, our thanks to all of you. Next, two distinguished retired Army generals on the state of the invasion going into week 6 of what Vladimir Putin likely expected would last only a few days. And later, new signs the January 6th investigation could be growing and aiming higher, and what Jared Kushner had to say to the committee today.
Heard it all before? But have you heard it like this?
The ultimate disruptor looks set to shake up our world. We really can't ignore the impact that this has. What can we do that explores a fresh angle? So let's untangle the players and political forces. The truth is a lot more complex. What's really going on?
Fast-paced news, in-depth reports, and fact checks from the perspective of The Global Brief with Bianca Nobilo. Tonight on CNN.
Business never sleeps. As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, journalist, global market analyst, and host of CNN's First Move. Join me in the financial capital of the world for market-moving perspective on the news influencing global politics, culture, and finance. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers. Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley. Today on CNN.
Korean automaker Hyundai Motor Company says the future of transport may go beyond traditional passenger vehicles, and that robots may change the way we move.
As an automotive company, we are thinking about the future vehicle. We can make some strong synergy between automotive engineering and robotics technology.
In 2021, Hyundai acquired Massachusetts-based robotics company Boston Dynamics for $1.1 billion. The company showed off its robots at this year's Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas.
People are incredibly able to move, to maneuver, to grasp things, to perceive their environment, and robots aren't really in that realm yet, but our long-term goal is to be able to do all that stuff.
Today, we live in an unpredictable environment, and news races around the world at breakneck speed.
Our engine continues, our impetus, our momentum.
My show brings you the latest news and top news makers. Give me the facts on voter fraud.
There has never been a moment where voter fraud has affected the outcome of an election.
And we also dive below the headlines to explore vital issues impacting our lives.
Normally this theatre would be filled with people and art and debate and energy, and so now we have to rely on the two of us.
How interesting is it to be Tyler Mitchell today? It's crucial we make sense of what's happening. There seems to be some confusion that maybe you can clear up. Where are the U.S. forces in Syria going? And fully understand what's at stake.
What's happening now in the world is a great thing because people are talking about subjects they never did before.
Amanpour, tonight on CNN.
I am Nigerian by blood, British by birth, and American by residence. It is important to me that those same strands of inclusivity that flow through me are mirrored in the stories that we tell. One World is a place where Africa has an equal seat at the global table alongside Europe, the Americas, and Asia. Every continent has a voice, and where everyone watching has a stake in the global conversation.
One World with Zain Asher, tonight on CNN.
This is video from the Kharkiv area in northeastern Ukraine. Regional military officials say Russian troops have been heavily bombarding the area over the last 24 hours, including a residential neighborhood and a gas pipeline. Whatever their other shortcomings, Russian forces still retain the ability to inflict destruction on a large scale. We're talking about that tonight, their apparent redeployment, doubts about the redeployment, and the new conscripts, and where all this leaves the larger war. Joining us, CNN military and retired Army Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, also retired Army Brigadier General Peter Zwack. He's currently a global fellow at the Wilson Center Kennan Institute. General Hertling, I want to start with you. It seems that nobody in Ukrainian, European, or American intelligence believes Russia's claims that they're really pulling back their forces around Kyiv to give peace talks a chance to progress. Can you tell us what you believe they are doing? And is this a strategic redeployment, or are they essentially doing it because they have to, because they're being moved by the Ukrainians?
Well, nobody believes it, John, because it's not true. It is just a repositioning of forces. They're trying to get some forces out that have been badly mauled by the Ukrainian forces. Many of the Russian battalions are just shells of themselves right now. So they're trying to get back and refit and perhaps reestablish personnel strengths. That's going to be very difficult, truthfully. Russia's got a hard row to hoe in the next couple of weeks to try and put these units that I would suggest, there's been the number of 10%, 15% losses. In those main combat units, I'm going to suggest that it's a lot higher than that, even close to 40 or 50%. So what you're talking about is trying to get forces that were in contact out of there. They're defending the areas with artilleries and rockets and missiles to keep the Ukrainians in one place. But this repositioning of forces is getting back into Belarus and trying to get out of the front lines is going to take a very long time, weeks, if not months.
Yeah, look, you look at all the destruction in Cristiano Mapora's piece, tank after tank after tank. It's easy to think it might be more than 10 or 15% losses. General Zwack, in his nightly address, Ukrainian President Zelensky announced that he had removed 2 generals who were serving in the security service of Ukraine, the main intelligence security agency of the Ukrainian government, calling them anti-heroes who, quote, have not decided where their homeland is. He didn't give any specifics there, but how do you interpret that?
I think we have to look at the entire, if you will, Russia, Ukraine breakup of the Soviet Union, and there were leftovers, if you will, from that period, and were overwhelmingly the bulk of the Ukrainians that came from that era, their military and their security services. There may very well be a few sympathizers in there, or may be affected by the carnage. So I buy that, that he may have a few informers, if you will, in his Ukrainian intelligence service, which, by the way, has been doing incredibly well by all accounts.
Yeah, John, if I can add to that, because Peter brings a very good point. My counterpart in Ukraine when I was commanding in Europe was a guy named Vorobyov. In a session over a couple of beers one night, he told me his biggest problems was getting rid of some of the old high-bound Soviet officers that had been trained in Russia in his force. That was one of his major concerns. I got to get rid of these guys because they're corrupt and they're more loyal to Russia than they are to Ukraine. So I think that's something like we're seeing right now, and Peter's seen that for sure in eastern Ukraine.
That's interesting. General Zwack, let me put this to you. Ukrainian officials say there are no longer any Russian troops at the Chernobyl power plant. They've transferred control of the plant to Ukraine. Russian forces earlier in this conflict showed very little regard for safety when it came to radiation or nuclear plants. What does this move, backing off from Chernobyl, General Zwack, say to you?
Well, I think General Hertling would say this is all about the Russians have taken them 5 weeks. We have a phrase in the Army, taking care of soldiers. And they have been driving through there because one of the main roads to the front in Kyiv goes right out of Belarus through there. And you've had troops on the site of Chernobyl, that have been basically, keeping the staff there a bit under the gun. So yeah, it's a mess. And I think that you've got reports anecdotally about troops that are complaining and don't want to be, they're getting sick and that's creating a problem. And I think now the Russians are forced to address it. Bottom line, they haven't taken care of their people to let them go through for 5 weeks the way they're doing, or even be garrisoned or staffed there.
Yeah, just one more example of that. General Zach, General Hartling, thank you both very much.
Sure, John.
And just ahead, we're going to discuss Putin's strategy for peace talks and whether Russia will honor that humanitarian corridor scheduled to open tomorrow out of Mariupol.
This is the result of one single blast.
3.3 million Ukrainians have now fled this country.
You don't have to go far to find a family who has been displaced.
We just heard an air raid siren ring out.
We run down for cover. It is hard to imagine life returning here.
In Kiev, Dnipro,
Poland.
This is CNN.
A Mediterranean diet offers a number of health benefits. Here are some easy steps to start your journey into the Mediterranean style of eating. Cook with extra virgin olive oil instead of butter, margarine, or refined oils like soybean and canola oil. Add foods rich in healthy fats to recipes and snacks. These include sunflower seeds, nuts, olives, and avocados. Choose whole grain bread and pasta instead of the refined varieties, and eat less red meat. Instead, add fish and other seafood to a few meals each week. Also, snack on lots of fruits and vegetables. Adding a starter salad to each meal is a great way to get more greens. Now for the beverages. Water should be your first choice. Also, switch from whole milk to a 1% skim or milk alternatives like almond milk.
I'm Phil Black in Lviv, Western Ukraine, and this is CNN.
Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN partner hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN partner hotels, connected to your world.
Released last year the very first motorcycle with radar, and what that's allowed us to do is to be able to put some technology in the motorcycle that gives features of safety for the rider, including blind spot indicators that's been used on cars for years. So we're not only dedicated to that performance, but also to try and improve our environmental impact and also the safety for the riders themselves.
I'm David McKenzie in Cape Town, and this is CNN.
The next round of negotiations between Ukraine and Russia expected to resume tomorrow. However, President Zelensky's chief of staff tells CNN's Christian Amanpour that he has a very, very small portion of optimism on peace talks. In a separate interview, the Polish prime minister echoed that statement. He believes Russia wants to negotiate, but from, quote, a very strong position. Still, European leaders are hoping the Russians abide by an agreement to reopen that humanitarian corridor tomorrow out of Mariupol. Nick Robertson is in Brussels. We spoke just before airtime. Nick, what's the latest you're hearing about the diplomatic talks? And is there a consensus on what Vladimir Putin's strategy is at this point?
It seems to be to chew up time to gain military advantage on the ground by saying that there can be some level of talks. Although it's very interesting, when he was talking with the Italian Prime Minister today, Mario Draghi, the Kremlin's readout of that phone call was Draghi asked him and said, it's time for you to have a face-to-face meeting with President Zelensky. Putin said, the time is not ripe. We're not there yet. So there's this talk, and we understand that there will be some level of engagement, of diplomatic engagement again at the end of this week, but it seems clear from the top that they're not really ready to make significant compromises.
As we mentioned, we're learning that at the request of both France and Germany, the Russian military says it will reopen the humanitarian corridor out of Mariupol. How much confidence is there that the Russians will actually refrain from attacking that space?
I think there's zero confidence, quite simply because Russia doesn't follow through on its word. And the Ukrainians, the German Chancellor, the French President have all seen this. They're engaging directly with President Putin, and what he says doesn't materialize. So I think at the moment, Russia is really just letting a few people go in dribs and drabs. They know it's tying up Ukrainian military assets inside Mariupol, trying to defend the civilian population there. According to Ukrainian officials today, humanitarian supplies that have been trying to get to some of the besieged towns, the Russians have stopped those in their tracks. So it's not at all clear that Russia will go ahead and do this. It has control of the situation, and it will take tactical advantage by making this drag out, making it play out slowly.
So there are new details from British intelligence sources about the morale of the Russian forces. What are you learning on that front, Nick?
Yeah, the head of GCHQ, which is the equivalent, I guess, of the NSC in the United States, Jeremy Fleming, said that the morale was so bad with Russian forces that they were actually sabotaging their own weapons, not having enough weapons as well, refusing to follow orders, and in one case, accidentally shooting down one of their own aircraft. And the assessment from Fleming is just the same as we've been hearing from U.S. officials, that none of the top military officials close to President Putin want to tell him the truth. That he's got troops in the front lines with bad morale, bad equipment, bad directions, bad leadership, making bad decisions, and not actually able to make the military gains that Putin wants and expects them to make. That points to the isolation of Putin. If he's isolated on military information, is he isolated on other information? For example, how sanctions are impacting him.
Nick Robertson, thank you so much for your reporting. So you heard Nick talking about the British report on the isolation of Putin and how his generals do not want to tell him the truth about the performance of Russian troops in Ukraine. As Caitlin Collins mentioned, President Biden cautiously alluded to the same assessment earlier today.
That's an open question. There's a lot of speculation. But he seems to be, I'm not saying this with a certainty, he seems to be self-isolating. And there's some indication that he has fired or put under house arrest some of his advisors. But I don't want to put too much stock in that at this time because we don't have that much hard evidence.
I'm joined now by William Taylor, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Ambassador Taylor, as we mentioned, President Biden says Putin seems to be isolating himself and punishing maybe some of his advisors. To that point, do you agree with U.S. intelligence assessments that Putin is being misled by his military?
John, I think he probably is. The intelligence services know better than I, but I'm prepared to believe them. What we do see that corroborates that is a lack of direction, a misunderstanding of what's going on the ground with his military. It's going very badly. He doesn't seem to understand that. It's also consistent with lack of direction from the president to his negotiators. The negotiators that have been meeting, the Russian negotiators that have been meeting with the Ukrainians, don't have any instructions. They don't have any proposals. They don't have anything to put on the table, unlike the Ukrainians that have come with serious proposals. They've obviously given a lot of thought And they're clearly in touch with President Zelensky. President Zelensky has his top political advisor, that is the leader of his faction, the Servant of the People faction in the Rada, in the parliament, who's a co-chair, a co-leader of that delegation down there talking with the Russians. And they, as you say, they'll probably talk tomorrow, but it's not clear at all that the Russian side is connected at all to President Putin, who doesn't seem to be giving any guidance at all. And he's not ready to negotiate, apparently, and that means he doesn't understand how bad it is on the ground.
That's a good point. There are different messages coming from the talks themselves and from Moscow about the talks. If there is tension between Putin and his top military officials, what impact do you think that would have here on the ground in Ukraine, the course of the war itself?
John, I think it had a big effect right from the beginning. The President Putin, again, divorced from reality, probably thought that the Ukrainians would not fight hard. He probably thought that the Ukrainians, well, we know he thinks that the Ukrainians are not really a nation, don't really defend themselves. So the military probably was not prepared for the fierce fighting, the strong fighting, the terrible fighting that they're getting beaten up that they encountered when they went into Ukraine. So that, I think, had a real bad effect. The Putin lack of understanding, bad briefing, bad concepts, bad notions of what it is, what he has done to the Ukrainian people to unite them has probably filtered into the way the Russian military has worked and not worked in Ukraine.
We're all witnessing a humanitarian catastrophe in Mariupol. Do you believe the Russians will actually deliver on this latest pledge, on top of all the others we've heard over the last days and weeks, to reopen a humanitarian corridor there?
John, we have no reason to believe that the Russians will do what they say. They've not in the past. Every now and then a corridor is used and some people get out, and that's a good thing. While we're talking about Mariupol, the Ukrainians have an idea, a notion of hero cities. And Mariupol is clearly going to go down in Ukrainian history as a hero city. It has defended itself and defended its civilians. The military has performed heroically under terrible conditions, and they are still holding out after, what, 36 days. So this is an amazing story, a hero city in Mariupol.
Yeah, the deputy mayor there told me they're fighting block to block, defending that city at this point, Ambassador. You said that Russia losing more soldiers, its economy is spiraling down, Putin may be up for more negotiations. Do you have any sense of what the Ukrainians would agree to there?
They've been pretty clear, John. They've been thinking about how they can provide their own security. They used to think it was going to come from NATO. Now they pretty much understand. They're reluctantly come to the conclusion it's not going to be NATO anytime soon. So they're looking for other things, and they've got some ideas that they've put on the table with the Russians that have to do with neutrality, a strong neutrality, a militarized, fortified neutrality that would allow them to maintain this great military that they are demonstrating right now. They want to keep that in any future system that does have neutrality. They want to be able to defend themselves. And the other thing they put on the table is the idea of guarantors, the other nations that would guarantee Ukrainian security if they gave up their option to go to NATO.
Ambassador William Taylor, thank you, as always. Coming up, the aftermath in a small border town after Russian troops withdrew over the weekend. We'll be joined by a reporter with Der Spiegel who was there and tells us what he saw with his own eyes.
I'm Ivan Watson in Zaporizhzhia, Ukraine. This is CNN.
I'm Julia Chatterley, host of CNN's First Move. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley, weekdays.
It really only takes a few moments to gain an appreciation of just how tough it is out here. They've been coming across sniper fire, gunfire, mortar rounds. You can see really just how intense it is here.
We have to wrap it up right now. Quite anxious about spending too much time on scene.
Those are the kids really struggling to get away.
they feel like they won't be able to outrun the war.
They thought the whole border was open. People are just trying to bust through towards what they think is going to be a better life. These nurses, these doctors really have nerves of steel.
You can't help but be struck by how interconnected our world is.
Arwa Damon, CNN.
CES has been a wonderful partner to all global technology companies, and we're so thrilled to be here to showcase some of the exciting things we have coming in 2022. We live in a very different world than we lived in a post-COVID environment, and we're excited to share the ways that we connect differently. Looking at your SmartThings display with the 2022 television that has the SmartThings hub inside, our bespoke refrigerator. And here you can really see how we're bringing the connected home to help your life. We're on the cusp now of making what used to be the smart home just the de facto way that we all live and play. So first we had smart home. Then we started talking about connected home. What we're looking at here today is just home.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 70,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore cnn.com/impact. Click to take action.
Over the weekend, Ukrainian forces were able to retake a town near the border with Russia, a place one local official last week had called the hottest point of fighting in the region. This is what Trostianets looks like now. These images were released by the Ukrainian government. They show burned out buildings, including damaged homes and a hospital. And as awful as the destruction is, what you don't see here may have been far uglier. It's something our next guest knows very well. Christoph Reuter was there, and he's just written a detailed piece on the aftermath for Germany's Der Spiegel magazine. Christoph, what was it like in Trostianets after the month-long occupation by the Russians?
We arrived as the first foreign journalists probably about 36, 40 hours after the last Russians had left, which the local people didn't know first because there is no working mobile line system, no landlines. So when we came, it was basically the first hours people dared to go out through their city, which they hadn't, many of them hadn't dared to do for 1 month. And there were incredible scenes of people meeting each other, not knowing if the other was still alive. Some had tears in their eyes to see the destructions. Others had tears in their eyes because they were simply happy to have survived. It was, in all this freezing cold, an extremely emotional moment for the people of Trostianets.
What a moment. What a moment that must have been. And we don't have that much visibility, or have it until this point, on what life has been like for people under Russian control. So when the Russians were in control there, how did they treat the civilian population?
This is the interesting thing, because Trostianets is like a case study where you really had Russians 600, up to 600 for 1 month. And when they entered, there was basically indifference. They did not interact with the local population. They had their food rations. They came, they took the empty police headquarters, the train station, took base there. But then, after 1 week approximately, they were shelled for the first time, and they learned rather quickly that everybody in the town was against them, and many were informing the Ukrainian army, the partisans, about their location. So the Ukrainians would shell very precisely the tank positions, etc. Plus, after a few days, the Russians ran out of food. They had food rations, obviously, only for very few days. And what they did was to loot local supermarkets, to loot local people, and to become very aggressive towards everybody, basically, out of panic, paranoia that everyone who gets near them could be an informer, and then they get shelled and die. So they introduced a curfew after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and whoever was out on the street risked to be shot, and many were shot or were captured, then tortured in their headquarters at the interrogation in the basement of the train station. So we could see, or we could learn from the accounts of the people, and from evidence we saw, like remnants of stuff they had looted, destroyed doors, destroyed ATMs, locks, how the behavior of the Russians had escalated from a kind of clueless gang into a very murderous horde.
What about the Russian troops themselves? The people you talk to, what do they tell you about how much the Russians knew about the war and what their mission actually was?
Yeah, this is especially if you take into consideration how brutal they behaved after a while, this is the complete bewildering element in this, because some people, like the head of security of the big chocolate factory, he talked with the Russians because they accepted him as kind of official spokesperson or somebody who's important. And the Russians asked him in mid-March, late March, where are we? Have we taken Kiev? Have we taken Kharkiv? Is Zelensky dead? They had no clue what was happening in the country. So he had to tell them what was happening. And when people asked them, so how long will you stay? Will you go somewhere? What's the mission? What do you want from us here? The only answer they would get was orders. We have orders. And obviously the order was, go to Trostyanets, stay there and wait for further orders. But there was no plan, there was nothing the Russians could explain. Why are we here? Why are we treating this town like a hostile environment, which it was? But what do we want here? They didn't know.
Christoph Reuter, thank you so much for this reporting. It's a window we just haven't seen. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Up next in Washington, the Department of Justice is expanding its investigation into the January 6th insurrection. And Jared Kushner, the son-in-law and former senior advisor to the former president, voluntarily meets with the January 6th committee. These details coming up.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Panerai watches have probably the strongest aesthetic code in the watch world. And for that reason, you simply cannot miss one on the wrist. There are so many ways that they catch your eye. Is it the oversized crown guard? Is it the overall shape of the case? All of these things, while being very aesthetically pleasing and very noticeable, are in fact very functional too, and speak to the Luminor's purpose first as a dive watch to navigate, and using, at the time, cutting edge luminosity to be able to see the numerals and the indices underwater. Now, the story goes that the Luminor was spotted in a boutique in Florence by none other than Sylvester Stallone. He was looking for a watch to wear in his new movie Daylight. He chose the Luminor, and the rest really is history, because the Luminor has gone on to have this star-spangled Hollywood career, featuring in so many movies on so many famous wrists.
To open doors,
to develop contacts, and to unlock secrets. It takes trust. It was the first time he really came out of his shell in front of a camera. Trust that you'll listen.
So great that you're here today. It just highlights what's making a difference.
That you'll be honest. I don't want to pry, but what sort of conversations do you have with them? Trust that you'll be accurate and you'll be fair.
It was an unprecedented move, very eerie. All the roads have been closed off.
Describe the scene that you arrived to.
The Apache attack helicopter. This is what Captain Wales has been flying.
Do you want talks with them?
What is the point of talking now?
Huge amounts of police support coming into this protest.
We continue to monitor the government in crisis. This was the Duchess's first news interview. Rare access indeed.
That's what it's all about.
Max Foster, CNN.
Across Africa, businesses are working together like never before. All new on CNN, Connecting Africa.
Join me and Lenny Jokos as we crisscross the continent to show you how new connections are revolutionizing commerce in Africa. This month, Connecting Africa through opportunity.
Africans are opening the doors more to other Africans on the business-to-business level.
Connecting Africa on CNN in association with Afreximbank.
In addition to the news from here, there are key developments back home in the January 6th investigation. Jared Kushner, the son-in-law and senior White House advisor to the former president, voluntarily met with the January 6th committee today. Also, the Department of Justice is expanding its own probe. For more, let's go to CNN's Ryan Nobles on Capitol Hill. Ryan, there are signs the Justice Department's criminal investigation into the attempts to overturn the election, there are signs it's widening. What's the latest on that investigation and who they're investigating tonight?
Yeah, John, that's right. You know, up until this point, the Department of Justice had seemed to be pretty focused only on the actual people that stormed the Capitol on January 6th, those responsible for the violence that we saw on that day. But now we're getting signs that the probe is starting to widen beyond just those individuals and into the folks that were responsible for planning and funding the rallies that took place here on January 6th. We have determined that there have been a number of individuals that have been subpoenaed that were connected to those rallies, that were part of the fundraising apparatus. At this point, it doesn't appear that these individuals may be targets. This may be more of a fact-finding mission as Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice widens its probe. But you'll remember, John, that there's been a lot of criticism from Garland and the DOJ that they've only focused on these kind of low-level offenders that were here and actually committed the violence and not those that were fomenting the anger around misinformation related to the election. This is a sign that the probe is starting to get just a little bit bigger.
So separate but related to this, Ryan, what have you learned about what Jared Kushner did or did not tell the January 6th committee today?
Well, in general, the committee seems pretty satisfied with his deposition today. Representative Elaine Luria of Virginia told CNN earlier that he did volunteer a lot of information that they were looking for. This was a voluntary deposition of Jared Kushner. And we know that he talked to the committee for a significant amount of time, more than 6 hours. Now, that is pretty standard. The committee usually conducts lengthy depositions, but when they fill that entire time, it likely means that they're at least getting answers to their questions, the questions that they posed to Jared Kushner. And he, of course, is a key player in all of this. He wasn't in Washington on January 6th, but he was one of President Trump's closest advisors. Of course, he's his son-in-law and was in and around the White House and the campaign in the time between the November election and January 6th, where Trump and his associates were doing a lot to spread information and peddle these lies about the election results. John?
Very quickly, place this along with everything else, including the developments involving Ginny Thomas, the wife of Clarence Thomas.
Well, it shows that the committee is really starting to zero in on a focus here. They are definitely interested not just in what happened here on January 6th, but the broader